It's a clear May morning aboard the heavy cruiser Aoba. Rear Admiral Goto scans the horizon as his convoy, including the light carrier Shōhō, moves steadily north. His forces are preparing to launch a strike against the Americans. Suddenly, word comes that enemy aircraft have been spotted. Goto watches in disbelief as Shōhō scrambles to launch her few available fighters. The sky above erupts with American dive bombers. Within moments, Goto's officers bark orders, sailors rapidly taking their battle stations as Shōhō becomes the dive bombers' target. The first major engagement of the Battle of the Coral Sea has begun. This video is brought to you by Manscaped.com, the men's lifestyle brand dedicated to mastering the beard. Here's a fun fact. Alexander the Great famously ordered his soldiers to shave their beards to avoid giving enemies something to grab in battle. Times have changed, and thankfully we can grow our beards as mighty as we want. But if you're still using an old trimmer with dull blades and loads of guard attachments, it's time to upgrade. The Beard Hedger Pro Kit by Manscaped has a 7,200 revolutions per minute motor and a titanium-coated T-blade that cuts through even the thickest beards in a single stroke. With 20 lengths on a single guard, you can say goodbye to clutter. It's waterproof, cordless, and rechargeable, so you can even trim in the shower. Get 20% off plus free shipping with my exclusive code at manscaped.com. Join 8 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped to keep their beards battle-ready. Visit the link in the description and treat yourself. Takagi's operation faltered as his forces spent the morning pursuing minor vessels, missing the American carriers. At 8:20 a.m., Goto received precise intelligence pinpointing Task Force 17, but he couldn't act due to limited air strength. Even more worrying was the report by heavy cruiser Kinugasa's scout aircraft at 10:08. They reported Task Force 17 was in the process of launching its own strike, because around that same time, a breakthrough seemed imminent for Fletcher. A reconnaissance plane flown by Lieutenant Nielsen from Yorktown reported 2 enemy carriers and 4 heavy cruisers 225 miles to the northwest. This Japanese force was beyond the operational range of the American fighters and torpedo planes. However, with the Japanese fleet moving south and Fletcher's forces heading north, he assessed that a full-scale attack was feasible. Shortly after the final group of 93 aircraft, consisting of Dauntlesses, Devastators, and Wildcats, cleared the decks of Lexington and Yorktown, the scout plane that had transmitted the earlier message about 2 carriers returned. The pilot, it turned out, had mistakenly identified 2 cruisers and an auxiliary gunboat as carriers, a critical error stemming from coding confusion. It was a far cry from the carriers. Upon receiving the corrected report, Fletcher's frustration boiled over. He angrily stated the mistake could have cost the US 2 carriers. His pilots were now flying towards minor targets while Takagi's carriers remained unchecked, likely closing in on his own fleet. Hesitant to break radio silence, Fletcher opted not to recall his aerial strike force. It was a decision similar as his Japanese counterpart, Admiral Hara, had made that same morning. Just before 1100, the light aircraft carrier Shoho was moving southeast, preparing for an attack on a US carrier force sighted earlier. With limited aircraft, 5 Zeros, 4 Claudes, and 6 Kates, Captain Izawa readied his fighters and launched them as replacements for air cover. Meanwhile, the Japanese cruisers formed a defensive formation around Shōhō. The Shōhō-class ships, initially designed as high-speed oilers, underwent significant transformations to serve in a far different capacity. Shoho herself was originally completed as a submarine tender, but her true purpose lay in her potential to be quickly converted into a light aircraft carrier. This conversion began in January 1941, and by the following year, Shoho was ready to join the Imperial Japanese Navy alongside her sister ship, Zuaho. These ships emerged as the most successful light carrier conversions for Japan. The conversion process was relatively straightforward. Shoho's original diesel engines were replaced with turbines typically found in destroyers. A flight deck was constructed atop the existing structure, equipped with 2 elevators that serviced a single hangar deck. Notably, the ship lacked an island structure for command purposes. Instead, navigation was carried out from a position forward of the hangar. Upon completion, Shōhō boasted respectable speed and an operationally useful air group, yet the vessel was critically lacking in protection. Her defensive capabilities were minimal, outfitted with 4 twin-mounted Type 89 5-inch guns. Her anti-aircraft defenses were limited to just 4 triple-mounted 25mm guns, an armament considered insufficient by many. That morning, she was preparing to launch a small strike against Task Force 17 when the incoming American strike force was detected. At that moment, Shōhō had only 1 Type 0 and 2 Type 96 fighters airborne. She had just recovered her 4-plane combat air patrol and a carrier attack plane. At approximately 10:40, 15 Dauntlesses spotted the enemy ships approximately 40 miles north, recognizing the carrier by its distinct light-colored flight deck. As the American strike group closed in, they identified Shōhō and several other ships, including heavy cruisers and a destroyer, albeit with some confusion due to the distance and haze. Leading the assault was the 3-plane command section of the land-based air group, spearheaded by Commander Bill Alt in his Dauntless dive bomber. As they approached from the south at an altitude of 10,000 feet, Alt executed a steep dive. He was closely followed by 2 more aircraft, their 1,200 horsepower engines roaring, with their perforated diving brakes deployed to stabilize and slow their descent. Trailing Alt were 2 Wildcats, commanded by Lieutenant Junior Grade Willard E. Eder. They joined the dive, only to find the skies relatively clear, apart from a weak and ineffective barrage of anti-aircraft fire. Captain Izawa prepared for the attack by initiating evasive maneuvers. He knew he had to anticipate the bomber's trajectory and begin turning the ship before the first bombs fell, yet he was cautious not to reveal his intentions too early before sharply turning starboard. As the SBDs dove, Izawa claimed to shoot down one, but this was inaccurate. Alt's planes released their bombs from a height of 1,000 meters, with some landing alarmingly close, within 20 to 50 meters, but no damage was inflicted on Shōhō. With no strike coordinator in place, the aviators all converged on the carrier, leaving the cruisers untouched. Caught off guard, Shōhō had planes still on her deck when the Americans arrived. With many of their aircraft grounded for servicing after conducting scouting and cover missions, the Japanese relied heavily on evasive maneuvers and anti-aircraft fire to fend off the approaching American bombers. A chaotic air battle ensued as Japanese fighters scrambled to defend Shōhō, but the Americans pressed on. While no direct bomb hits were recorded during the first strike, the force of the exploding 500-pound bombs blew 5 planes off the stern of the Shōhō's flight deck. As the carrier sharply turned to port, into the wind, to launch her aircraft, she became an easy target. As Lieutenant Dixon led his squadron of 10 SBDs around to the east, they descended, picking up speed as they maneuvered towards Shoho. They soon attracted the attention of Japanese defenders. Fighter aircraft lunged at the first Dauntlesses as they began their dives. A lone Type 0 fighter managed to damage one Dauntless during its dive and shot down another as it pulled out of its attack. Shoho made a sharp port turn, complicating the attacker's aim. 2 hits were later claimed, one near the ramp and another in the center of the flight deck. These assertions were confirmed by multiple observers, yet the truth revealed that all of VS-2's bombs had missed. As the remaining Dauntlesses withdrew, pursued briefly by 3 fighters, a momentary pause ensued. However, Captain Izawa and his crew knew the threat was far from over. More dive bombers loomed high above, and the slower torpedo bombers approached. In a last-ditch effort to fortify Shoho's meager combat air patrol, Izawa commanded the carrier to align into the wind. 3 Zeros, freshly serviced and waiting on the flight deck, prepared for the oncoming assault. The US torpedo planes split into 2 divisions, advancing toward the carrier from both the east and west. Simultaneously, bombers were descending from 16,000 feet, approaching from the east. As they reached 12,000 feet and positioned themselves 3,500 feet upwind from the carrier with the sun overhead, the first aircraft began their dives. Pilots of the bombers noted the absence of defensive fire from the cruisers as they began their attack. This lack of opposition likely stemmed from the lengthy gap between assaults, leaving the Japanese to anticipate only a torpedo attack. As the Zeros took off, the crew discovered enemy torpedo wakes off the starboard side as the 2nd Dive Bomber Squadron launched their attack. 3 Mitsubishi A6M0s attempted to intercept the American attackers, but to no avail. The first 1,000-pound bomb struck directly on the center line, just 250 feet forward of the ramp. A massive explosion engulfed the rear of the ship in smoke and flames, leading to a chain of devastating impacts across the flight deck. These successive detonations unleashed havoc on a vessel already on the brink of destruction, culminating in violent internal explosions that tore the hull apart, sending flames soaring into the sky. The bombers scored 2 devastating hits with 1,000-pound bombs on Shōhō's forward section. The bombs ignited massive fires on the hangar deck, where armed and fueled Kates were waiting to be launched. The bombs also ripped into the after elevator, exploding within the rear hangar. The second bomb struck just aft of the forward elevator, ensuring that damage in the hangar extended along the entire length of the ship. Meanwhile, torpedo bombers from the 2nd Squadron swooped in from 100 feet, exploiting a gap in Shoho's cruiser screen. The first torpedo hit occurred on the starboard side at the rear. 4 more torpedoes followed on the port side, hitting the midsection just behind the forward elevator, near the fore, and again forward of the elevator. The 5th torpedo struck the starboard side directly across from where the 2nd hit, likely wreaking havoc in the boiler rooms and slowing down the ship. Water poured into the ship, as damage control teams below deck frantically attempted to close off compartments. As the ship was burning, flooding and heavily listing, Yorktown's strike group finally arrived. 6 minutes after the torpedo attack, 24 dive bombers swooped down to strike the crippled vessel. As many as 11 bomb hits were confirmed by Japanese sources. Then, 4 minutes later, another wave of Yorktown's torpedo bombers attacked, claiming multiple hits, with Japanese reports confirming 2, though more likely struck. In less than 30 minutes, Shoho was dead in the water, as a cataclysmic explosion sent flames shooting 400 feet into the sky. The carrier, ablaze and rendered dead in the water after sustaining at least 13 bomb hits and 7 torpedo strikes, sank at 11:35 a.m. with only 203 survivors out of its 834 crew. All 18 of its aircraft were destroyed. The Americans lost 6 aircraft in the engagement. The attack was famously marked by the message, "Scratch one flat top," the first Japanese carrier loss in the war. Shoho's sinking marked Japan's first ship casualty of the war that exceeded a destroyer. By 1450, both American air groups had returned. Learning of the successful strike against the Shōhō, Fletcher cancelled plans for a follow-up strike against the carrier's supporting vessels. He was now focused on the still unlocated enemy carriers. However, while the embattled Shōhōs was slowly sinking, miles to the south, Rear Admiral Crace's flotilla faced its own challenges. That morning, at 8:10 a.m., a Japanese seaplane spotted their group, shifting the focus of the Japanese air assault. Instead of targeting Task Force 17, the Japanese redirected their land-based aircraft against Crace's 6 ships. Reconnaissance floatplanes reported sporadically on the squadron's movement westward. A scout plane identified the force as 1 battleship, 2 cruisers and 3 destroyers, relaying their location to Rear Admiral Yamada's 4th Air Group, based at Vunanakau Airfield near Rabaul. 11 Zeros from the Tainan Air Group provided fighter escort, while 12 Betty bombers, each equipped with a torpedo, launched from Rabaul at 9:50. This strike was soon followed at 11 o'clock by 19 Mitsubishi G3M bombers. The flight path of the first formation lay directly between Crace's squadron and Fletcher's carrier group. Weather played a significant role that day, with Fletcher concealed beneath layers of thick cloud cover and Crace's task group exposed to clear skies. That morning, at 8:40, the lookout aboard the flagship Chicago already reported that a Japanese floatplane, which had been tracking Crace's task group for approximately 30 minutes, had departed. For just over 5 hours, Captain Crace's squadron would experience no further contact with the enemy as they zigzagged westward. A brief moment of alarm arose at 9:40 when radar detected a contact to the northeast, only to reveal itself as a B-17 Flying Fortress. Yet, beneath the surface calm, the Japanese forces were far from idle. Moving at 25 knots in a defensive diamond-shaped formation, Crace's positioning allowed for mutual support and overlapping fields of fire, enhancing their collective defensive capabilities against the incoming aerial assault. At 13:45, Chicago's radar detected enemy aircraft approaching from the southeast, just 27 nautical miles away. The cruiser's CXAM radar failed to identify the altitude of the approaching aircraft, leading to an element of surprise when the Zeros appeared at low altitude. The ships of Crace's squadron opened fire with every available anti-aircraft gun, yet the Zeros, perhaps equally astonished, swiftly retreated, suffering no losses. 30 minutes later, radar detected fast-approaching aircraft, with the range closing to 12 nautical miles within 16 minutes, when the attackers were sighted. The destroyer Perkins's crew initially thought the flash from the aircraft might be a friendly signal light, while the crew of the cruiser Chicago quickly identified it as sunlight, reflecting off hostile planes. It was, in fact, the first wave consisting of 11 single-engine torpedo planes. They launched their attack against the fleet. What ensued was a rapid and intense exchange. 11 Japanese torpedo planes, flying in a V formation. Anti-aircraft fire erupted from a range of 8,200 yards with the ship's forward guns. The initial volleys appeared effective, with reports indicating that the leading plane was struck, bursting into flames and crashing just ahead of Perkins. Another aircraft collided with the flaming wreckage, meeting a similar fate. As the attack progressed, smoke and flames billowed from two planes as they released torpedoes toward the Australia. One plane banked sharply toward Australia just before launching its torpedo. A separate aircraft crashed on the starboard quarter of the Australia after passing ahead of Chicago. Several more planes from the port side targeted Chicago with their torpedoes, and one crashed just off the Australia's port quarter. The remaining two aircraft, one trailing smoke, continued on, opening fire with machine guns as they maneuvered toward the formation. The entire attack lasted only a few minutes. While Walkie's report credited 4 definite kills and 3 additional aircraft trailing smoke, Chicago's account also noted 5 downed enemy aircraft. The Japanese reported losing 6 aircraft during the operation. All reports converge on one conclusion. Every Japanese torpedo missed its target. Crace's force had been very lucky, for now. Minutes later, Crace's radar picked up a second wave of 12 Mitsubishi Ki-21 Sally bombers. They approached from astern as the Bettys cleared the area. These aircraft moved rapidly towards Crace's squadron. The crew quickly adjusted and resumed fire on the planes approaching from the rear. Flying at an altitude of 24,000 feet, these bombers passed directly overhead, disappearing from view only after releasing their payload. Captain H.B. Farncombe of the Australia ordered a sharp right turn as soon as the bombers were spotted, avoiding the bombs that had tightly clustered around his ship. Bombs fell perilously close to the Australia, shrouding the ship in smoke, while near misses were also observed near Hobart. The altitude made the bombers difficult targets, leading to a ceasefire at 15:20. Half an hour later, a third wave of 19 bombers, soaring at altitudes between 15,000 and 20,000 feet, launched a high-altitude bombing run. They failed to land any bombs as Crace's ships continued zigzagging to evade the bomb hits. Then, moments after this attack, 3 4-engine planes were spotted. A string of bombs landed just behind the destroyer Farragut. As it turned out, this was a case of friendly fire. Crace identified the bombers as B-26 Marauders, but they were later identified as U.S. Army B-17 Flying Fortresses. The U.S. bombers, en route to target the MO invasion force, mistakenly identified Crace's squadron as the enemy and dropped their bombs on the nearest ship Farragut in the southwest corner of the formation. Fortunately, these bombs were even less accurate than those dropped by the Japanese, sparing the squadron from further damage. The battle was over, and Crace was furious having recognized US aircraft as the final wave of bombers. As for the Japanese aviators, they were confident in their efforts, mistakenly reporting they had inflicted a lot of damage on Crace's force. They claimed the sinking of a California-class battleship, an Augusta-class cruiser, and heavy damage to a Warspite-class battleship and a Canberra-class cruiser. In Rabaul, Dispatchers, swayed by reports from Japanese pilots, cancelled any further planned assaults. It wouldn't be necessary, they thought. In reality, Crace hadn't lost any ships. While the torpedoes and bombs had all missed, Crace's squadron did not emerge unscathed. Both the Australia and Hobart reported 3 men wounded, none seriously. Captain H.L. Howden of Hobart sustained a minor injury when a metal splinter struck his arm. The American ships fared worse. 2 men aboard Chicago were killed, both from head wounds. Several others aboard Chicago were injured, some due to accidental friendly fire from their own ship's anti-aircraft guns during the chaos of battle. Crace, low on fuel and without air cover, withdrew while remaining vigilant against possible aerial attacks. In the battle's aftermath, Lieutenant General George Brett, the responsible air commander, vehemently denied that any American bombs had been dropped on the squadron, leading to tensions between Crace and his Allied counterparts. It wasn't until after the war that the truth emerged, confirming that the bombers were indeed 3 B-17s, led by Captain John A. Roberts of the 19th Bomb Group. As for the battle, by the afternoon, Admiral Takagi learned of Shōhō's loss. The sheer number of American aircraft involved in the attack made it clear that 2 US carriers were operating nearby. In response, he redirected his transports. Rather than advancing through Jomard Passage toward Port Moresby, they were ordered to remain north of the Louisiades. Inouye ordered the invasion force targeting Moresby to retreat temporarily. He moved the invasion convoy out of American aircraft range and concentrated his surface combat forces near Rossel Island, preparing for a potential night attack. He also ordered Admiral Goto to split his cruiser force. 2 ships were to remain with the main force, while the other 2 were sent to support the carrier striking force. These decisions marked the southernmost point the Japanese would reach in the war. The dangerous cat-and-mouse game continued throughout the afternoon, as both commanders realized they needed to take more risks if they wanted to have an advantage against their adversary. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please leave a like, it really helps out the channel. If there is a topic, battle, or person you would like to know more about, let me know your thoughts in a comment. I would also like to thank all my patrons and channel members for their generous support. If you enjoy House of History and you want to support my work, consider joining me on Patreon. For just $1 per month, you will already gain early access to all my videos without any in-video advertisements. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.